Good morning, everybody. It's David here from British Blind Sport. I would like to thank you all for joining us this morning for our next edition of the Paralympian podcast. I have Mike Brace joining me this morning. Thank you for joining me, Mike.
Pleasure.
So just before we sort of get started, Mike, could I please ask you to just give a brief sort of introduction of, your sporting background, particularly what sport you are most well known for?
I went blind when I was 10, and therefore my sporting career has slightly changed, really. I was into football and cricket and a bit of athletics. And then when I lost my sight, I could still do some of those sports. And then in the early 70s, an opportunity came up to try cross-country skiing in Norway. And once I'd done it once, that was I was hooked. So basically, skiing has been my passion for the last, 40 years. And basically, getting others to try skiing has been almost a lifelong ambition.
That's fantastic, Mike. And I suppose that takes me on to my next question. So you mentioned, obviously, that upon losing your sight, you took part in various different sports. But how did sport provide an aid in sort of your adjustment to be able to live with, your sight loss and the rehabilitation side of things as well?
I think it was probably threefold, really. I think I lost a lot of confidence. Obviously, I lost my sight, and therefore you were in a totally different world. In those days, the choices were limited, so you went to boarding school. And I, in some way, resented that in terms of being away from my home and my mates, etc. But on the other hand, it really did sort of change my life in that I discovered sport that could still happen for someone who couldn't see. And that was a real plus. So that gave me a chance to challenge myself, really, in terms of what I thought I was capable of. The second thing was really the competitive nature. I was 11, 12, 13, and I saw these kids who were blind doing these amazing things with the football or cricket or athletics. And I thought, I'm going to be as good, if not better than them. And that was a real push to look at my own abilities and to develop various skills and orientation and stuff like that. So that really was a big push, plus that then obviously widened that into your general mobility. And the third area, I suppose, was, my family were devastated, and the people that I'd come into contact with had really not had much to do with someone with sight loss. And so what I was then doing sporting wise really challenged their perceptions of what someone with a disability could do. And so, the three bits were then realised, really: personal challenge, the competitive bit with peers, and then the public awareness of disability were all, if you like, challenged through sport.
That's fantastic. And, sport often provides many different challenges for people, which I think is why most people enjoy it and get a thrill out of it. Particularly, you mentioned there around it allowed you to grow in confidence. So would you agree that, participating in sport gave you that more confidence to sort of lead what people would consider a normal life as such, being able to get out and about and live independently?
Yes, I think when you got challenges in other aspects of your life, you almost used your sporting challenges to put that into context. So as soon as someone said, "Oh, you can't possibly do this," or "You can't possibly do that," then that triggered me to say, well, that's exactly the thing that I want to do, whether it be in sport or in other areas. And I think the skills that you get, the self-discipline are actually quite important in general life that sport gives you. I've been in teams as well. So basically, you've got the whole thing about teamwork, and then you've got the underlying psychology and stuff that goes with, you know, having the mentality to do your sporting activities.
That's really, really interesting, Mike. You know, I personally believe that sport is a great tool to develop not only, you know, your physical abilities, but also other areas of your life. And, you know, I can transfer that into your work life. While we're sort of still on the subject of obviously your sort of participation in sport, you're well known for obviously your cross-country skiing. So could you please tell us a little about your professional sort of and competitive skiing career, please?
Yeah, I got selected for the first Winter Paralympics way back in 1976, and these were going to be the first games for winter sports for people with disabilities. And in those days, it was primarily in the cross country, it was amputees and vision impaired, and in the alpine was vision impaired and amputees. So there were limited options for wheelchair paraplegic skiers in those days. And as I say, having got the bug, I then not only then started to compete, but I started to manage the team as well, because I found 2 or 3 others that were of like mind to me. We all were basically self-funding, so therefore they had to be able to cover more and more of the costs of training. And then we obviously went to the first games. We did fairly well. None of us came last, but we were probably ill-equipped. The guides were provided over there, and some of them didn't speak English. And when we came back after the 76, we vowed that we would never go to another games as unprepared. So we then started to take on board our own sort of volition, really, in training. We managed to recruit some guides from Norway that we were skiing with then in competition in Norway every year. And then the second winter games were in Yalo in Norway, so that was ideal because we had the guides based. We did much better there, so we were starting to finish in the top 10. We then went on to World Championships that started, and we did even better there in terms of starting to be in the top sort of 6, especially in some of the newer events like biathlon, which is skiing and shooting. You ski, you lay on the floor and shoot a rifle at a target. You ski, you shoot a rifle at a target, and you ski to the end. And it's your combined ski score plus any misses that you've got on the shooting. So we started to do well. I got 7th in the World Championships in the biathlon, and then we went on to Austria for 2 Paralympic Games. One of our blind skiers then, Peter Young, sadly no longer with us, he won a bronze medal then in the cross country, and we had some blind downhill skiers that won medals in the downhill as well. So suddenly we'd gone from, you know, a bit of a joke, a lowland country that didn't really have a history of skiing, to in the same games, one of our guys winning a medal in the downhill and one winning in the cross country. And so I went on, I went to 5 Paralympic Games as a skier, and then I went to another 7 as a manager, either as a direct manager or chef de mission, right the way through to my last games was in 2006 Winter Games, and then I was in 2008 in the Summer Games as chef de mission.
That sounds really thrilling there, Mike, and you've definitely been to travel some incredible countries through the means of being involved in sport. I have one of our listeners, Alex, who would like to ask you a question. And
Yep.
so I'm just going to hand over to Alex so she can ask her question for you.
Hi Mike, thanks for joining us today. My question actually is from a parent of a young boy who's aged 10, and he lives in Leeds. He came to one of our ski taster events a couple of years back, and he really enjoyed it. he's since been skiing once with his family and would like to take it up back at home a little bit more regularly now. I just want to know if you've got any tips for him to kind of kickstart his journey with skiing.
Yeah, in terms of the opportunities in the UK, obviously for cross country it's virtually impossible now, because the two slopes that were in the UK are areas for cross country, they've stopped, been closed down. A number of the dry slopes though do certainly have provision to encourage and deal with people who want to try skiing who are vision impaired, and in some centres they've even got people that have done some guiding as part of that. There is an alpine ski group, mainly doing some of the elite areas, but basically if they could link into the alpine ski group, they could find out if there are some guides around that could help in the area where the person is, and that might be a good starting point, because I'm not aware of, because of all the issues, I'm not aware that there are many organised groups for vision impaired youngsters under 16 because of all the child protection and everything else. And they might also then be able to advise certain centres abroad if you're going on a holiday, which may then have good guides for people with a vision impairment.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. I'll pass that then. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you for your question, Alex. Mike, we've just had a question submitted online from one of our listeners, Sarah. She wanted to ask, how many different sports have you sort of tried over the years? And you know, which ones were your favourites other than skiing? And would you suggest a sport to try for a first-time participant?
That's a really good question, because basically what I said earlier about the attitude of people, you can't possibly do that because you can't see, that's usually prompted me to do exactly the opposite. And so I worked out, I think over the last 50, 60 years, I think I've tried 54 different sports, most of which I've been absolutely useless at. But I'm the one that's decided that they're not for me, or the difficulties outweigh the joy and the benefits. And these have ranged from ones that have really given me a buzz, like water skiing. I've done some abseiling. I've done some scuba diving. And most of those are around the experience you get. So scuba diving, you've got this total sound silence because you're in the water apart from the bubbles. You're abseiling, obviously, you've got this rush that you're stepping off a cliff. And when we did it, the very kind instructor did it near a motorway 200 feet below us, so you could hear how high you were. So I think he could have not bothered with that from my point of view. So those sort of things. Water skiing as well was just a fantastic elation, and you're going behind a boat, obviously. Parakiting was also fantastic, going up behind a car on a parachute and being towed along and being able to navigate. So those were fantastic. And then, running obviously is the first step for many things in terms of getting you the fitness for other sports. So you can get a level of aerobic fitness that then allows you to do a whole range of different things. So, I've done a lot of events in athletics, so javelin, shot put, discus, the running, the long jump, etc. And they've given me a range of different options. And then you've got the more, I would say, sedentary ones, like bowls. Obviously is a great sport, a big participation sport for blind. Ideally suited because you're in a fairly safe environment, so it will deal with people with all different levels of fitness and ability. And the other things that I've enjoyed now are things like archery and shooting. Obviously, swimming is another very good aerobic fitness one that you know, you can really get quite good at quite quickly. So all of those, I would say, are you know, good starters, and many of those would be available in most areas. But I would start certainly with something like either, you know, running to get fit, so park runs, etc. On a Saturday, if you can get a guide, that would be really a good starting point, just to get a level of fitness and a level of mindset around your activity. And then the world's your oyster, because there are so many sports out there that very often weren't available when I started, and that more and more people through BBS and through other groups have really started to open those up. Tennis is another one that's really fast growing, and again, I think that would be another very good one to think about. But tennis for the vision impaired. Again, it's an indoor court. It's got certain areas that you can orientate yourself in, so that's a really good starting point.
Thank you for that answer, Mike. It's really in depth, and I've got a really good sort of inside view to your sort of, you know, demand to want to try new things and challenge, and those sort of stereotypical views people have of the VI community. Just as we're moving on, we've had a question from Mark Perry, who's listening in via Facebook, and he's asked around where you mentioned the start of your journey, you were self-funded. So how were you able to secure sponsorship, and how did you sort of overcome those challenges in terms of making sure you were able to finance and get to those competitions and events to be able to compete at a good level?
I mean, it did vary. In 1977, I took part in the annual ski week that I helped organise from a UK perspective. So we're now 40 odd years on. We usually get 20 to 25 skiers from the UK going over to this annual ski week in Norway. And I went over, first time I went in 1974. That's when I got the light for skiing. 1977, excuse me, when I went, I got a guide provided to me from the Norwegian sort of organisers, and he happened to be a top businessman in Norway. He was in fact the managing director of ICI, which is a big chemical company for the Scandinavia, and he obviously saw that we were serious, having been to the Paralympics. He felt that we were exactly what he felt he was into the game for, in terms of finding potential and helping it to realise itself. And so he then started to say, well, he could then provide us with equipment, he could get clothing for us, because in the first games we were given these plastic shell suits that didn't breathe. And it was so funny, we just felt like sort of jungle fresh peanuts in these plastic bags that we were wearing. So by the time it got to Yale, we had proper ski gear that the Norwegians had provided, and we got proper skis, you know, of a higher quality. And then from then on, we were doing various fundraising. So in '83, we decided that for the next games, we would need to raise some serious money. So we did something pretty stupid, really. We did 3 marathons in 3 sports in 30 days. And the idea was that people paid £50p for a ticket, and the prize would be £50, to guess the total time it took us to do all 3 marathons. And we thought it was difficult with 3 of us doing it, so it was all then based down to me to finish all 3. We did a ski marathon, and we then did the Devizes to Westminster canoe marathon, which was probably one of the worst things I've done in my life, and one of the most gratifying things I've done in my life. And then we finished with the London Marathon. And so from that, we raised about £3,500, which would then cover the costs of the team going to the Winter Games in Austria. And so it was largely through things like, not lottery, but doing, raising money through those sorts of mad schemes, plus a bit of direct input from our main guy from ICI, that kept it going all the way through. And then just as we were finishing our careers, we managed to get one of the banks to sponsor the team for a while. And that was, again, the first time we'd got, if you like, proper commercial funding for our team. But sadly, it was towards the end of our sporting sort of career in the early 90s.
That's incredible, Mike, and just the achievements that you've sort of, been able to achieve through the means of fundraising. Not many people have completed one marathon, let alone 3 in 30 days. That it must have been very mentally tough to be able to do that. So this is a great insight into your character and your drive to succeed in life.
I mean, the ski one was probably the easiest because we were all skiers. We had our Norwegian guides, and therefore and we were running to get fit. So that in Norway was pretty okay. We then had to find these canoe guides, and I think I am pretty mad in terms of some of the things I've attempted. But what we needed with the canoeing was to get someone slightly more bonkers than we were in order to then allow that to happen. And I don't know if anyone knows the Devices Canoe Marathon, but it's over 125 miles non-stop. And that was bad enough. I'm thinking, if you think of 3 or 4 miles an hour paddling, you're talking, quite considerable times anyway. Then they said, oh, by the way, there are 72 portages. And I said, well, what's a portage? And they said, well, you've got to pick the canoe out. You've got to run around these obstacles and put it back in the water and carry on canoeing. And we're in a double canoe, 22 foot long. You've got to laden with basic provisions. And I said, well, so what are these portages? And they said, well, it could be bridges, it could be one of which was 1.25 miles. So you had to run 1.25 miles with a canoe above your head around the obstacle. And you had to do different things like that 72 times. So when we got to the end, it took us, plus the fact that the weather conditions were the worst in the history of the race to that point. So the winning time was normally 15 hours. And I think when we did it, it was 20 hours. 182 canoeists started the race in doubles or single canoes. And out of the 182 that started, only 82 finished. And we were then 41st. So it took us just over 27.5 hours non-stop on April Fool's Day as well. So probably apt. And then I could barely stand at the end of that. I was so shattered. My guide in the canoe, when we got to Westminster Bridge, fainted. He passed out with the strain and the effort. I could barely stand unaided because I've been sitting in this canoe for 27 hours. And 2 weeks later, you've then got to run the London Marathon. So trying to get back up for that. My first marathon was then not wonderful. I probably did about 5.5 hours because I could barely run, let alone I barely walk, let alone run. But we did it, and the incentive then was the 3,500 that we would raise as a result of that. So you ended up digging massively deep. In terms of your reserves, your resolve, and your just whole, attitude about what you can do, your mental strength were really put to the test.
That is truly incredible and inspiring at the same time, Mike. So the next question, I was going to move on to sort of time away from your competitive racing career, because I know you've been involved in many different roles away from competing. So Would you be able to tell us a little bit about sort of your involvement in the management side of things, and then some of the sort of positions that you've held on boards and different things post your career competing as a skier?
And I think that's been almost, I wouldn't say more important, but as important as my competing career, because the things that sport gave me, the drive, the will, the challenge, the sense of elation in terms of just the freedom that you get from sport, really prompted me to say, why am I so lucky, and why are so many other people with a vision impairment or other disabilities not either knowing about these opportunities or even getting those opportunities? So in those early days in the 70s, I, with 7 friends, set up the Metro Sports Club, which is still going now. We've got hundreds of members. We do a whole range of sports. We get funding to enable them for anyone in the London area. We then set up a cricket team, which then went on to win the various challenges and cups and stuff like that. So we had Metro, and that meant that I was chairman of that for 10 years and trying to steer it through and trying to get us all the opportunities that we all want now in terms of the sports that we can do. Following that, when we had the Winter Games, I then helped set up the British Ski Club for the disabled to then try and promote and get more people to have those opportunities and to know about them in the Winter Games. And at the same time, I then set up British Blind Sport, your good selves, and obviously was around on the board, and then became chairman of British Blind Sport at one stage as well, at the point when we were then pushing for better inclusion and better involvement in things like the Paralympics. So up until the 80s, most of the international sports were organised by the individual disability groups, and what was being more and more clear was that the Paralympics were here to stay, and what you needed was a coordinated approach that could bring in all the disabilities. So I then helped set up the Paralympic Association as well in the UK, and subsequently became chairman of that as well. And so building up that involvement as a sort of interested person around the sport meant that you started to then have a chance to influence the chances that other people got. And from there on, as chairman of Paralympics GB, I got asked to be on the bid team for London 2012. So, you know, again, I just think I thought I'd sort of died and gone to heaven, really, because suddenly I was with all these great and the good from the sporting world representing disability sport on the Paralympic Games Committee. I was doing the presentation to the IOC for our bid. I then was in Singapore in the room when we won the bid, so it was just again a dream come true. And then I was on the organising committee until I stood down as chairman in 2008, 2009, and then was on an advisory panel on the Paralympics until the Games. So, and it then sort of snowballed from there. I then got asked to be a director of the anti-doping agency, so I helped set that up. I was on the advisory panel, and then on the main board for 6 years. And that was again an opportunity through sport that I got in terms of making a contribution around the whole anti-doping agency, because it's as prevalent in Paralympic sport as it is in non-Paralympic sport. And from there, other opportunities, board of one of the universities in London, and then some other opportunities to do with IT and stuff like that. So and the IT opportunities mainly came because I had all these sporting connections, and so they wanted to do a lot of websites and stuff for sporting bodies, and therefore that's how I got involved with a company that does websites, which I'm still chairman of, this small IT company. So very diverse opportunities, but largely all coming from the sport that I've been doing, and all of the sports opportunities then enabled me to bring some of those skills from managing teams. So I managed teams in the athletics, I managed teams at skiing, and I managed the first blind England cricket team that went to the World Cup in India. So you're managing teams of sportsmen and women, and that then crossed over to my day job, because all of this as a volunteer. I was never paid for any of this. I was a volunteer, and that then crossed over to my day job, which was then initially as a typist, then a shorthand, then a social worker, then a social work manager, and then I ended up as an assistant director for children's services. And what the two then meant was you got skills from the sport that you brought to your work, and skills from your work that you brought to your sport. And so the confidence, the challenges were just interspersed really with each other, and that for me was just fantastic.
That must have been incredible to be involved in the Paralympic bid for London 2012. I mean, for me as a sports fan, actually seeing that result, you know, that we'd won the bid back in 2012 was amazing. So to be part of it, I can only imagine the sense of achievement and thrill that you felt.
And pushing it through, because I think they would recognise that initially it was an afterthought. What they said was, and I hadn't really realised this until we were involved, was that up until 2012 bid in 2005, any bidding city for the Olympics didn't have to bid for the Paralympics. And that all changed from 2012, when basically they changed the rules in terms of the summer games. They changed it for the winter games for 2010. But any bidding city for 2012 onwards, if they bid for the Olympics, they had to bid for the Paralympics. So there was no choice. And what they said very clearly and very early on was that the Paralympic part of the bid wouldn't necessarily win it for London, but it could certainly lose it for London if we were poor or bad at what we presented. So talk about no pressure there. So when you're standing up in front of the IOC in London, and you've got you know, the ministers and the health ministers all speaking, and then you've got you know, video linkage at the cabinet office and stuff like that. So we went to the cabinet office and had a meeting in the cabinet room. You're then at Buckingham Palace for a dinner with the Queen and stuff like that. And there's me, you know, Hackney boy, sitting there thinking, you know, I just thought this was a bit of a dream. And then you're doing your presentation, and then basically you're through to the shortlist, five countries, and then we're over in Singapore having to present, and not just the 30 minutes or whatever you do the presentation. It's the 3 or 4 days that you're there. You're lobbying, you're presenting various things in terms of subgroups, etc., etc. Was incredible experience, and quite frightening in some ways, because I couldn't take my wife with me, so I literally was totally blind on my own on the 72nd floor of a hotel in Singapore. And then you're having to rely on colleagues, friends, or people that you've met on the board to, you know, sort you out for breakfast and things like that. So it was in a very, you know, very inspiring, and I was quite elated by the experience, but I was also quite daunted, because you were fairly isolated as someone who couldn't see. So you really had to pull on a lot of the skills that you'd learned around mobility, around how you interacted with people, and very often that was through my
Mike.
Oh, right.
It's not just giving you a deathly silence there. Are you back with us, David?
I am back with us. I do apologise to everybody. I just lost internet connection there.
I thought you were just dumbstruck, that was all, you know.
I can't lie, Mike. These stories are so inspiring, and you know, I'm very certain that you're going to inspire so many young people and of other generations to get active, because the opportunities that sport provides for people is endless. So just as we're sort of moving on, we've spoken sort of briefly about some of the things that you've achieved, and some of those things are awards like an OBE in 2005, your CBE in 2009. But what has sort of been your biggest achievement, you know, in your opinion, throughout your lifetime?
Oh gosh, I would say probably 2 or 3 different bits. I would think a lasting, hopefully, legacy is setting up Metro. I mean, Metro has literally had the chance to change so many people's lives across both the country, but also mainly around the whole of the London conurbation. The range of sports, the opportunities that we've given people over the years, the support that we've enabled them to do, the growth of things like the tennis now that we've got, the cricket teams that we've got, are just unbelievable. When we started in 1973, none of that was available. There were no regular sports opportunities for people with a vision impairment in anywhere in the London area. And when we left school, that's why we set the club up, because there was just virtually nothing. There was a couple of cricket clubs, but they were pretty lackluster in our view. And so instead of moaning about it, we thought, well, okay, well, we'll do something about it. We'll set something up. We all put a $5 in, and that was the formation of it. And now you've got 6,000-7,000 hits a month on the website. You've got 300-400 members. You've got, I don't know, 15 different sports. We've got people coming to Norway. So in terms of setting up those opportunities, and like BBS and Paralympic Association, having a role in setting those up, because that's the issue. Unless the younger people now around pick up and run with that, it doesn't come without a cost. You've got to put stuff back in to enable those things to happen. And a lot of sports people are pretty selfish, I must admit, because that's the nature of the sporting mentality. But it's being able then to give some of that back, I think, is absolutely crucial. And so setting up Metro, I think the marathons that I mentioned was probably my biggest sporting challenge stroke achievement, to get through all 3 and still be alive at the end of it, I think was just unbelievable. And I suppose the thing that gave me the biggest thrill again was being part of the Olympic Paralympic bid, and then being on the organising committee, and then attending, I think, undoubtedly the best Olympic and Paralympic Games that there's been to date. I mean, the crowds, being in the stadia, it was just unbelievable. And basically, you know, I think those would be the 3 highlights. And then I suppose on a work basis, having not worked in sight loss for, I don't know, 30 odd years in mainstream social work, then setting up and running Vision 2020 for 10 years. Sadly, it's just gone into sort of liquidation in the last few weeks, Vision UK. But again, getting that up and running for 20 years to try and challenge and change the opportunities for people with sight loss across the board was, again, I think, an incredibly important aspect, and it may be time limited, I don't know, but it was an important part of, if you like, my development as well.
It's really interesting there, Mike. I suppose if we move forward now to more recent times, particularly surrounding, obviously, the world sort of health crisis with COVID-19. How have you sort of found, you know, coping with that? Because many of the visually impaired community have felt very isolated. They've not been able to remain active. So what sort of things have you done to be able to stay active and stay positive through a very difficult time?
And I totally agree. I mean, you know, my main sort of weekly fitness campaign was 3 times to the gym. It's a 1.5 mile walk there. I do an hour's quite strenuous workout on the different bits of the gym, and then a 1.5 mile walk back. So you're doing that, and suddenly that's completely removed from your calendar. I had lots of meetings uptown, so I was going up on the underground, you know, 2 or 3 times a week to various meetings, or travelling up north to other sort of events. And all of that suddenly stopped. And in the last 6 months, I haven't been on a bus or a tube in those 6 months. Again, because there are still difficulties around social distancing, and we're in quite a busy built-up environment here, so it's difficult. Luckily for me, I've got a guide dog who can only walk at 100 miles an hour, and so the need to make sure that he's A, having regular time on a harness, and B, regular exercise has meant that I have had to have regular exercise with the dog. So I reckon during the closed down 4 months, I reckon I did about 250 miles walking with the dog, 2-3 miles a day, 4 miles an hour, which is quite a fairly brisk walking pace. So that's been my main, if you like, physical activity. And then I've been doing stuff. Luckily, I've got a garden, so I'm not a gardener and profess not to really enjoy gardening, but I've had to do quite a bit of gardening over the last few months. So I've been doing stuff like that, and that's meant you're out, you're sitting around or standing around and doing things in the outdoors, which obviously suits my sort of mentality. And then I've been a few meetings on Zoom and a few interviews, doing some writing. I have had 2 books published that I did through the Amazon that are also on Talking Book, but I'm now thinking of doing some more writing. So I've been doing a history of winter sports for the Paralympic Association. I've been doing a sort of history of Metro for the Metro Sports Club. I'm involved with something around the history of the development of blind cricket with the blind cricket international body. And then I'm thinking about doing some possible creative writing, you know, just for my own amusement. But if it turns into a 3rd book, then that would be brilliant. I've got a guide dog that is pretty mad, so and his name's King. So I think if I do a book about him, I've got the title already. It'll be The King and I. So I'll have a think now. He does proclamations. He's a very clever dog. He's written 9 proclamations so far that he sends out to 200 or 300 people. So and they've gone down quite well. So I might use those a bit.
You've been very, very busy through the lockdown period then, Mike, which is very pleasing to hear, because many have fell into that slum, unfortunately, where they don't know what to do with themselves. So
I should also say I am chairman of our local voluntary society, so a lot of the time has also been seeking out how we can relieve isolation from other vision impaired people in different communities. And you know, we are getting referrals from the hospital because there's no ECLO service in the hospital. Our sensory team is pretty limited, and therefore us as a voluntary group are getting more and more calls to see if we can intervene with just supporting people at a difficult time in their homes. So we are phoning people. I've managed to get a batch of fire tablets for some people to have and try. So again, just something to brighten up their days a bit.
Your work with the VI community, Mike, is truly incredible, and not just through, the means of sport, but what you're doing more recently now. It's very inspiring, and there should be plenty more people out there that should be using your initiative to try and challenge those boundaries and support, the VI community more.
I think it's, for me, it was initially self-interest to challenge that, but it just, I'm just so desperately wanting people to have just half the opportunities that I've had, but it's not going to happen by osmosis. It's got to be with intervention like BBS, like the various groups that are around, like Metro, like to actually give people the confidence. One of the interesting things is that we've, as things have evolved, we've now got quite an active group of women playing in our cricket. And years ago, it was men only. Vision impaired women really did have very few opportunities. And it's just so fantastic now seeing, when I go skiing now with our groups from the UK, there are more women coming to those events now than there usually are men. And it's wonderful to have, have that sort of equality opportunities. In our cricket team now, we've got some really good players who in the team from men and women, so it's mixed teams, and that means why should the restrictions only be for one group or one subgroup sort of thing? So it's so important that we carry on having those open-minded thoughts and debates, and then it is developing those opportunities for everyone, and not just the few. And I think that's seeing the tennis now and the equality around that and the way it's played, and just seeing more and more of the sports really being truly equal. I just think is really important, and we just need more people to carry on pushing those boundaries.
Thank you so much for your time today, Mike. You've been really, really great to have on this podcast. Your stories are truly inspiring, as I've mentioned before. So yeah, I can't thank you enough for your support.
A great pleasure, and keep up the efforts. I mean, the opportunities that are now doing have a go days, are ways of getting tasters. I remember one of the consequences of the Paralympics in 2012. One of the things that we hadn't really realised was that, in the early days when things were covered, most youngsters with a vision impairment went to special schools. So I would say 95, 98% of people with a vision impairment went to special schools. Now, around the 2012 timing, it was probably, I think there were 600 children in special schools, and the other 20-odd thousand were in mainstream or in dual disability groups. And what we hadn't realised when we staged the Paralympics was that changing arena, really. And so what happened with the coverage, 150 hours of coverage of the Paralympic Games, we knew it would challenge people's attitudes to disability. If you saw those images of people with different disabilities doing these amazing things, you couldn't help but be challenged in terms of saying, well, this is ability in action. The Games were the first sporting event for people with a disability as opposed to a disabled sporting event. And so what we saw was those images and those activities. What we hadn't quite realised was that for the first time, hundreds of young people with disabilities in mainstream schools suddenly saw people like them doing these amazing things. And they said, quite honestly, why can't I do that? Why am I not able to have a go at doing X or Y or Z? And when we held a Have a Go Day after the Paralympic Games, we did a couple of taster events. And we were expecting, 60, 80, 100 people to turn up. And the first one, 1,100 youngsters turned up for the Have a Go days. And I just thought that was proof of the pudding, because they suddenly saw people like them doing these things. And a third of the team that went to Rio 4 years later came from those Have a Go days. So it's that inspiration that you as a sports person can give others, but also then if you can put some effort into enabling that to happen ongoingly, whether it be joining in some sort of sports group in your local area, etc., that will then give others the chance to build on that and to go forward.
Yes, definitely. I have to agree there, Mike. I am afraid we are out of time today,
Okay.
but it has been a pleasure hosting you this morning, and I'd like again to thank you for your time and the audience for tuning in. If anybody does have any questions for Mike, if you did want to forward them to myself, I can pass them on to Mike, and I'm sure he'll be happy to answer those. I can be contacted by email on david@britishblindsport.org.uk. So yeah, thank you for joining me, Mike.
Great pleasure.
For anyone who does want to listen to our next episode, which will be held on Friday the 25th of September, we'll be having former Paralympic footballer David Clark joining us. So please tune in. Thank you very much, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. And thanks again, Mike, for your time today.